And welcome to the July Macular Society virtual clinic. It's great to see so many people on the call again today, and welcome to everybody. We spent many, if not most of these virtual clinics in the last 12 months talking about the AMD, the disease, the biology of AMD, how it develops, why it starts, who's susceptible, and so on, as well as looking at the potential treatments and ways of finding cures for macular degeneration. And tonight we're going to look at a different aspect of AMD. We're going to look at the emotional impact that it has. And we spend an awful lot of time talking to eye care professionals about the importance of them being alert and aware of the potential emotional impact of AMD. And so we thought that this evening it was time that our virtual clinics paid attention to this aspect of the condition as well. My guest tonight is Suzanne Roberts. She is the Macular Society's own head of our in-house counselling service. Suzanne and her team help hundreds of people every year deal with the emotional impact of a diagnosis of and a journey with macular degeneration. And in a while, she'll be telling us how and why counselling can support people going through those journeys. But she's also tonight going to be talking about the pandemic, the impact on our well-being and our mental well-being that the pandemic has had. But also paradoxically, we're beginning to move out of lockdown, we hope, and this can bring its own pressures as well. Moving out of lockdown and moving back into wider society can bring with it pressures all of its own. And we've been talking a lot about this in the Macular Society itself, with our staff and with some of our volunteers, and increasingly with people who once upon a time would turn up for a Macular Society group meeting, for example, but who now find that quite a challenging prospect, having spent so long isolating, shielding, or at least prohibited from doing the things that we have all come to use as our support mechanisms before this dreadful pandemic happened. So as usual, there will be time for questions later on in the session. So do please put your questions in the chat function. You can raise a hand. There are quite a lot of people on the call as ever, and I'll keep a lookout for hands, but do please put your questions in the chat for Suzanne for later on. But Suzanne, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening and giving us your time on a Tuesday evening. And I'm going to hand over straight over now to you, ladies and gentlemen, Suzanne Roberts. Thank you, Suzanne.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you, Kathy, for that warm welcome. My name's Suzanne Roberts, and I've been with the Macular Society now for 15 years. And as Kathy says, I head up the counselling service. And this evening, I'm going to talk to you about the emotional impact that the pandemic has had, particularly upon those who have macular disease. Plus, I'm going to speak a little about the counselling service and how counselling might be able to support you or a family member. So I will refer to themes and strategies that we use with clients within our counselling service. So I think it's really important to make it real. And I'd also like to say that I'm conscious that there may be a number of people on this call who have been personally affected by the coronavirus in terms of illness or more tragically by loss. So as much as this talk is about moving forward, I'm mindful and respectful of the deep suffering that some have endured. So, and as individuals, let's think about how we've sort of coped over the last kind of 18 months, really, or possibly longer. We've been following government guidelines, we've been washing our hands, we've been socially distancing, wearing masks, and many who have been medically vulnerable have been shielding and have not left the house for many months. I know there's people that have come through to the counselling service who haven't left their house for up to a year or possibly longer. So in coping over the last 18 months, we've changed the way that we do things. For example, the way that we contact others, and how many of us would have thought that in order to remain connected, that we would be using Zoom or Teams meetings or joining an evening such as tonight using your telephone, tablet, or your iPad. So we've had to adjust in line with the restrictions. And there are many people that you will speak to, and certainly people that come through the counselling service, who will say that, you know, they've adapted very well. Perhaps their lives haven't changed hugely. And there'll be people that we all know that have just kind of got by. And there'll be those that have found it extremely difficult. So I think it's not fair to say that we've all been in the same boat. And that phrase comes up a lot within the counselling service. People will say, well, we're all going through the same thing. And I think there definitely are similarities, obviously, but it's very hard to compare, say, somebody who lives alone and doesn't have any family, or family that live far away, compared to somebody, for example, who has a partner or has a support bubble. That's very different. And let's think now about the messages that we have all received from the government, from the media, and they've been all around us, haven't they? Either TV and radio and newspapers, etc. And there have been messages such as stay at home, stay local, stay safe. And there's been phrases, you know, like hands, face, space. We've been given lots of facts and figures on the prevalence of the infection rate and also the death rate. And now, as restrictions are being lifted, we're being advised to take personal responsibility. And there's another key phrase, which is to proceed with caution. So bearing in mind those messages, think about how generally we might feel, or people might feel, having heard those messages, and those messages being around us for quite a long period of time, and they're still there. Now, with the counselling service, we've certainly seen an increase of people coming through to us and talking about feeling very sort of anxious, feeling quite lonely, and feeling quite isolated because of not having that connection with others. There's many people that have felt quite low in their mood, and also pessimistic about the future. There's certainly been a fear of safety, and be that of our own personal safety, or that of our friends, or of our family. And also hypervigilance. So if you think about being hypervigilant, it's about being really kind of tense and really alert, and sort of alert to danger. And we've all been very aware of how close other people have been to us. And if anybody out there has kind of been in supermarkets, I've seen lots of people who felt kind of a bit uncomfortable with people sort of queuing up too close to them. So there's certainly been that awareness. Frustration comes up a lot, not only with the frustration of a visual impairment, but also the frustration during recent months of not being able to do the things that you would normally do. And for some people, these activities are really important. So, for example, I worked with somebody through the counselling service who was a man who used to play cards at his local social club 2 or 3 times a week. And that was like his family. And then having that taken away had a massive impact on him, because it wasn't just a social activity. It was where he had stimulation, where he had friendships, and where he really connected with other people. And I know clients have said that as restrictions have been lifted, they're so grateful to be able to go out and have a meal with friends, or to just have some kind of company. Being less mobile has been mentioned a number of times with our clients, because over the past 18 months, many people have not been as active, either through not being able to because they've been shielding, or because of restrictions that have been placed upon us. So there's many people who are feeling a lot stiffer than they would be, not having that sort of physical activity, and also not having that mental stimulation through being with others. And I think that has led to a lack of confidence. Many clients will talk about wanting to go out, but feeling really apprehensive for a number of reasons. and many have been questioning their capabilities of what they can and can't do. So if you're somebody that actually wants to go out and about and you feel really comfortable about doing that, it's a case of doing something rather than doing nothing, because we know that with any set of circumstances, avoidance maintains anxiety. So if it's something that you're fearful of doing, I'll give you an example, like going into a lift. If you decided that you were never ever going to go into a lift again, that might make you feel kind of comfortable because you'd be avoiding your fear. It might prove quite difficult in certain situations, but you wouldn't be teaching yourself or teaching your brain or giving examples to yourself that you could actually do it. So it's a case of slowly, and also bearing in mind that your environment or our environment may well have changed over the last year or so. And this has come up a number of times we've talking to clients, that there's lots of pavement furniture, for example, now, where lots of people have been eating outside. It might be that there's roadworks that were not there before. Many have spoken about their vision deteriorating during this time during the pandemic. So there's a number of things to sort of take into consideration. And no wonder that there are many people that are feeling quite anxious. So it's not only the lack of confidence, it's also the fear of COVID too, and not having practiced something for a very long time. So I'd say that if you do want to venture out and you've got somewhere specific where you would like to go, to practice your route. And it's really important to try and break down any kind of goal that you have into manageable chunks. So for example, if you felt that you used to walk into town, but now you're feeling quite apprehensive, it may be a case of just walking halfway and having somebody meet you. Or it might be a case of walking there, but making another arrangement to walk back. Often people will split up journeys like this with stopping to meet somebody and having a coffee. So I think rather than sort of take on the whole challenge, think about sort of small steps and manageable chunks. And during all of this time, and especially as certain restrictions are being lifted, it's really important that we all sort of respect that others will have a different opinion to ourselves. Will have different values and different starting points. So there may be, some of us may be more resilient than others. Some of us may be predisposed to feeling anxious, or as a lot of clients would describe, they would say, I've always been a bit of a worrier. And many people may have suffered long term with their mental health. So we're not all at the same starting point, but it's really important that you do it your way. If you find that you're feeling quite sort of stressed or you're feeling anxious, it's really important to be able to sort of stop and take some time out and perhaps practice some simple mindfulness, or I like to call it me time. And this could be something really simple, such as sitting in a quiet space, perhaps closing your eyes and remembering a time when you were really happy and you were really content. And that might be you were sat on a park bench somewhere. It might be in your garden or your bedroom, wherever it is. I know there are many people that will practice this kind of exercise, but will imagine being with a family member or a friend or somebody that makes them feel really warm and safe. So this is a way of kind of trying to reduce anxiety, reduce your stress levels. There's a lot of talk about breathing exercises, and they can be quite simple. And I know with the counselling service, the counsellors will often recommend a technique which is called the 7-11 breathing. And if any of you are sort of savvy with the internet, etc., and you type in 7-11 breathing, it'll come up with lots of different apps, lots of different examples, including the NHS. And the idea is that you breathe in through your nose for 7, and then you puff out for 11 breaths as if you're puffing through a straw. And for some people, the idea of the 7-11 might not quite work, and it doesn't matter how you do it. You could do it 5 breathing in through your nose and 10 puffing out through your mouth. But the idea is to try and find a rhythm where you feel comfortable and where it slows your breathing down to kind of a continuous pattern, because when any of us feel stressed or even really excited, our breathing will change. So the idea is to focus on the breath and not so much about what's going on in your head. Also, don't be afraid to say that you're not quite ready. And this is something, you know, for all of us, just to be able to think that it's okay to say, I'm not quite ready to do things differently, that you may continue to want to wear a mask. You may continue to want to socially distance. You know, even if these things are not a legal requirement, it's something obviously that you can still do. And then it goes without saying that obviously eating as healthily as you can, staying hydrated, sleeping as well as you can, which is quite difficult in this heat, but making your room as comfortable as you can, taking an interest in yourself and exercising, however a small amount of exercise that might be, just doing what you can. They're sort of key elements that contribute to our overall well-being, as well as staying connected with others as best as you possibly can. Many clients that come through to us on the counselling service, particularly when there's been sort of the early diagnosis stage, will say there's nothing I can do, when actually there's always something we can do to sort of help ourselves. So being able to look after yourself as best as you can puts you in a much stronger position to deal with any challenges that you might come up against, be that with macular disease or be that a challenge or a trauma or something that presents elsewhere in your life. We are all in a better position if we're as healthy as we possibly can be. And the theme over the last 18 months has been not knowing. And this is a theme that comes up a lot with the Macular Society too. We've all been waiting for guidelines from the government, or we've been waiting for guidelines that also then have to come from employers or people that we volunteer for. And knowing what's going to happen in any situation helps us to feel more in control. And learning to tolerate change and adapt is a skill, and it's one that we're still learning. And no doubt the adapting and learning definitely links with macular disease. Sometimes setting yourself a goal each day or each week, however small that might be, can help you to have a sort of structure to your day or to your week. Particularly if you're somebody that lives alone or you don't have a lot of contact with people, just waking up and knowing what your plan is for the day often helps people, because it can help to feel that there's a plan in place, there's something that's going to happen, and a sense of achievement once you've completed those tasks. But obviously there are situations when we don't know, as we've all been in, and there are no definite answers. And as I've said, this most certainly links with macular disease and any progressive eye disease. And here are some of the examples of questions that frequently come up within our counselling service and linking to the not knowing. Will my macular disease go to my other eye? Would it have made a difference if I had seen someone sooner? How long will I be able to read for? How bad will my vision get? Really important and really emotive questions that don't have any definite answers, but are frequently posed to us within the counselling service. So how do we kind of work with clients around the not knowing? And some of the sort of tips and strategies that we would use are generally around managing anxiety, but there are other things such as try to remind yourself of what you do know. Remind yourself of the facts and ask yourself, is this my opinion or is this factual information? So for example, when somebody says, well, I'm not going to buy a new sewing machine because I definitely won't be able to use it in 6 months' time, it's thinking about, is this a fact or is this your opinion? And try and challenge those negative assumptions. Often it helps by trying to think of somebody who's really positive and ask yourself, what would they say? And each time your mind starts to worry about the not knowing, or you find yourself getting frustrated, try and bring yourself back to the here and now. Sometimes it's a case of telling yourself, stop, and keep coming back to the here and now. What do I know now about my current situation, my current circumstances, and the things that I do feel happy about? And with worries, it can be helpful to put them into 2 categories. So those that you can do something about, so i.e. those where we have some control, and those that you can do nothing about. And a friend once used the analogy about the ones that we can't do anything about, attaching them to a cloud and letting them float away. So worry is only useful if we do something about it. So the motto here is about being kinder to yourself. I think remember that self-care isn't selfish and you cannot pour from an empty cup. We have to replenish and look after ourselves in that way. Do things your way and at your pace, and remind yourself that it's only natural to have off days. And that's okay. We all have off days. But if you find that you're having more off days than good days, then maybe that's when it's time to talk to somebody, be that friends, be that your GP, or possibly by coming through to us at the counselling service. So I'll tell you a little bit about the counselling service. And first off, I'll start with some of the sort of common myths and misconceptions. So often when we're talking to clients that have come through to us and are thinking about whether or not they're going to proceed with the counselling service, sometimes they might say things such as talking about it won't make a difference. Counselling is for people with serious mental health problems, or there'll be people that need your service more than me. And yet counselling can give you the opportunity to openly speak to somebody, particularly with our counselling service, who will have specific knowledge and understanding of your condition. And we know there's very few services that provide such a unique service, particularly around macular disease. So we have that expertise and we have that knowledge, and that in itself provides comfort and relief to many. And you'll be speaking to somebody that is not related to you in any way, so has no preconceptions about you or your life. And there are many occasions where a client might come through to us, or a caller would come through and have just one session and say, I feel so relieved just talking to somebody who understands. Counselling can also help you devise new strategies and give you an opportunity to unravel some of your thoughts. Sometimes when we're really kind of stuck in a dilemma or we don't know what to do, we can assume that it's too big a problem for somebody else to help us. But actually being able to talk it through can be really helpful. And as with the other sort of myths and misconceptions that I was talking about, counselling can't bring back your eyesight. Just like if somebody was to go for grief counselling, it can't give back what they want, and that's the person that's passed away. But what it can do is these things that I'm talking about in enabling you to get the most out of your life, and to talk through ideas and ways of making life more manageable, making life more enjoyable. We can also signpost you to other services. So it might be that during an initial assessment or during the counselling, we realise that maybe a referral to social services might be really helpful to you, or linking you with one of the macular groups might be something that you would really enjoy. So it's always thinking about what is going to be helpful for you. That's what your counsellor would be doing. And there will always be people that are worse off or better off. What matters is the impact that your situation and your condition is having on you. Many a times I've had people say to me, there'll be people much worse off than me, so I think you should speak to them. But this is about you, and this is about, why you have contacted the society. So I think try to let go of that thought, if that's something that's ever been on your mind. You are important. So the counselling service is a free, confidential service. And the way that you or a family member can access the service, if you are able to go online, you can do that via our website and make a referral. Or you can call our advice and information line, where you just simply talk to somebody and they will take down your details, and then you will be contacted by a member of the counselling team to be offered an initial assessment. And at the initial assessment, we simply run through your situation, what's troubling you, and try and sort of think together what would be the next best steps. And lastly, we often speak to clients who will at times sort of underestimate their value. And I think, and also their purpose in life. And this can very much be linked, not always, but can be linked to a visual impairment. And what I would say is, remind yourself of all the things you can do and your value of just by being you. And perhaps think about mentors or people in your life, even as a child, teenager, young adult, or even now, people that have supported you and encouraged you. And was it because of what they actually did the whole time? Or was it also about how they were there for you? So just don't underestimate your presence at just being there, you as yourself and what you can offer. And then I've got a little picture on my screen that you can't see, but I can see it here. And it's two little birds looking at each other, and it says, "Spread the kindness." So I will end there because I think my time's up, but we've got time for questions. I'll hand you back to Kathy.
Hello, thank you very much indeed, Suzanne. That was a terrific explanation of so many issues and the service itself. So thank you very much indeed for that. It's a very interesting point you make about people underestimating their value and their worth, and how you connected that with sight loss, because I do think that happens a lot to people. That they can't contribute, and there's nothing important left of them. And I think a lot of older people can feel that anyway, can't they? And I think that can be magnified to such a great extent.
Definitely, yeah. Without a doubt, there are many people, I think, who, for example, when something's taken away, such as being able to drive, and feel that there is, a huge purpose has been taken away from them, but actually then are on a struggle to kind of look at all the other things in their life and all the things they can do, and, as I say, the value just of their presence.
So self-care is, I think, possibly for older people, a novel concept, isn't it? We're not often told to look after ourselves in previous generations. I'm counting myself in this as well, as not being a chicken myself. quite a difficult concept for some people to allow themselves to look after themselves, really.
Definitely, and I think we see that more so with callers that come through who are very good at being able to look after others, or perhaps have been a carer over a number of years or a carer now. So they're very good at being able to support other people, but their own needs have kind of gone to the bottom of the pile. And I think you're right, it's a new concept, but it's so important.
How can you convince yourself then that that's important if it's ingrained, you know?
I suppose that's very hard, isn't it? And that's where a service such as the counselling service will enable us as counsellors to be able to highlight that way of thinking that may be ingrained for many years. And I think it's a case of sort of being able to sort of talk things through. And so many times clients will say, well, I never really thought of it that way, you know, because they've always been in that role through either looking after children or looking after parents, or just not so much sort of focusing on themselves. So I think it's particularly now with the pandemic, there's so much information out there about well-being. I think it's probably more on the forefront of people's minds than ever before.
So going back to who this service is for, the Macular Society service, somebody has asked whether we offer counselling to people outside the UK, and although it's not common, but you have had that. We will take that sort of referral, won't we? And you have done so on many occasions, I think.
We have done that, yes. And how we've done that is through WhatsApp audio or WhatsApp video. So that has taken place, and that is an option. And that might be that's an initial assessment, or it might be that it continues for a number of sessions. But we always make that person aware that we're not going to be as aware of services in the UK, you know, depending on where they are from. So if we're speaking to somebody in Canada, we're not going to be, you know, as familiar with services and procedures as we would be with a client in the UK. But it has been done, and we don't ever say no, not if they've got macular disease.
No, that's absolutely right. Somebody makes a point here that it's got harder and harder to handle this pandemic situation the longer that it has gone on. It doesn't easier, does it? It's not something that we get used to. You know, this as the question says, we seem to be able to handle things in the early days of the pandemic, but these last few months have been really difficult. Knowing how to get going again is a big challenge.
Knowing how to, what did you say, Kathy?
Get going again.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting, actually. There seems to be sort of two groups of people. I think there are a number of people most recently that I've spoken to that have said, well, with restrictions being lifted now, I feel I can cope and I've got things to look forward to. So there are the people that are sort of saying they've got hope now, that they're moving on and that they're going to feel better. In fact, I spoke to somebody today who said exactly that. And I think there are other people that have just simply had enough and been completely worn down by it. And I think that's totally understandable. And I think if anybody is feeling like that and they want to come through to us at the counselling service, you know, please do, because we work with many people who are feeling like that. And I suppose our way of working would be to try and help sort of think about what you can do now and what you feel comfortable doing.
And a question here about the typical number of sessions. You're thanked for a good practical points. How many sessions do people normally have when they come through to counselling?
Sometimes it depends on the reason for the referral, I suppose. Sometimes it might be a case of somebody being diagnosed very recently and is really kind of shocked, has been given a diagnosis and they don't know where to go, and found our telephone number and have come through to us, and they might just have the one assessment session and be quite happy knowing that that's where we are and knowing that they can then come back to us. Other people may well come through and have up to 6 sessions, which is sort of standard, although not everybody needs that. And if, for example, somebody is really struggling, or it's actually, we think that it's going to be helpful to offer more sessions, we will offer a maximum of 12 sessions in any 1 year period. So bearing in mind that it's a free specialist service, and we have a very, very small waiting list at the moment just because we've been very busy, but it is a unique service in that sense.
Unique in the sense that it doesn't have a waiting list. I mean, that is extraordinary, isn't it? Because we've been very fortunate that we have had many generous supporters and trusts and foundations and funders who will fund an important service. So we have been able to expand the service as the demand for it has increased, but there's no doubt then the demand is increasing very considerably, and the big jump wasn't there when the pandemic kicked in the number of people who sought your help.
Even now, I think there's been an increase with things changing, because I think it was going into the pandemic, and then we were in a sort of a long period of kind of knowing what was happening or knowing about the limits, and then things were constantly changing. And now we've seen an increase, most definitely last month and this month. So although for many it's great that restrictions are being lifted, there's still a lot of apprehension, which is completely understandable.
It's very interesting the way uncertainty, the impact that uncertainty can have on people, and I think it's throughout society, being unable to plan, working people when they're going to go back to the office, when will I be travelling again? Just for leisure, you can see on the faces of people who booked holidays to France, had to cancel them to get back in time for before the quarantine was imposed over the weekend. You could see the distress because they thought they could plan and they couldn't, and being thrown into uncertainty. It's that I don't know why do you think some people cope better than others with uncertainty in that way?
I think a lot of the time it's to do with personality, maybe. I think some of us just might be better at coping with the not knowing. And as I say, some people might naturally be more predisposed to feeling quite anxious. And also a big element will be support network. So I think if you live on your own and you're starting to feel, really that you're really struggling, I think that's far more difficult for somebody who has a partner who's able to just talk little simple things through, so that they then don't build up, or hopefully they don't build up into something massive. Because I think we all know that if we have a worry and we sit on our own, or we've got hours to think about it, it can go from a tiny worry into something huge. So I think it's people who've got a support network around them may well cope a lot better than those that are alone. But again, I think if anybody listening is alone, then use our services to help build up your confidence, because that's what we're there for.
One of the interesting services that you've launched in more recent times is the service around Charles Bonnet syndrome. Can you tell us a bit about that? Charles Bonnet syndrome.
Yeah, sure.
Is hallucinations that are generated really by the brain, the brain's reaction to the lack of signalling from the damage coming through the optic nerve to the visual cortex of the brain at the back of the brain. So this is not an abnormal response. It's in some people with sight loss, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think we noticed that there was quite a large number of referrals coming through from people who were really struggling with the Charles Bonnet hallucinations. And the hallucinations would vary from between people seeing patterns very occasionally, or seeing things change colour, to people seeing animals or seeing figures. And what would also vary was the sort of duration and the frequency. So some people might just see them once every week, and other people might see them on a very regular basis. So we set up a Charles Bonnet group to support people, because the other thing that we found was somebody who is experiencing the visual hallucinations will naturally want to speak to somebody else who's also experiencing them. So we will offer everybody that comes through to us an assessment, and sometimes group work is appropriate and other times it isn't. So say, for example, if you're only experiencing a few hallucinations, even though they might be causing you a lot of distress, it might not be helpful to put you in a group with people who are experiencing a number of hallucinations, which might be quite scary. So then we would offer you some one-to-one support. Sometimes we will signpost back to the GP if we think there's unanswered questions around, could medication be interfering here? Could there be a urine infection? But we will always talk to that person. We also have a presentation that by somebody called Dominic Fitch, who's a world expert in the Charles Bonnet syndrome, that I will share with anybody that comes through to us. And also the Macular Society have leaflets on the Charles Bonnet syndrome that people find helpful to either show to talk to family and friends, or often to take them to their GP. And I spoke to a chap today who said to me, after having your leaflet and listening to the presentation, I feel okay, I feel I can manage my hallucinations and I don't actually need to go into your group. So that was fantastic.
It is, assurance is so important, isn't it, with children? Because people think that all sorts of terrible things are happening to their brain, and in fact it's a normal response. Dominic Fitch, of course, is a previous guest on the virtual. If you go to the website and want to see his talk, it will still be on the website and you can view it from there. So group versus individual counselling, this is entirely based on the clinical need of the patient. We're not saving money by putting people in groups. It's
not at all. Not at all. I think it's more of a case that the people that actually go into the group get so much from one another and from sharing experiences. And when I phone everybody that's been in the group, and they will always mention how interesting it was to hear other people's stories. And of course, people will compare, and they will compare their hallucinations. But the other comment which comes back in the feedback is, I no longer feel alone. And I think that's so important, whether it's the Charles Bonnet syndrome or whether it's struggling with anxiety, depression, visual impairment, to not feel alone. I think that's huge in itself. And I think with a lot of our callers, after the counselling is finished, whether that's group sessions or that's individual, many will say, it means so much to know where you are and to know that we don't disappear, we're around. So they can always come back to us through advice and information or to the counselling service.
I'll give out the number for the advice and information service in a minute. Sorry, that's my diary talking to me. I'll give out the number for the advice and information service. In handy if you want to write that down. So somebody has asked a question here about the background of the counsellors. Where do the counsellors come from? Where do you come from? And what are your qualifications and backgrounds and so on?
There are a variety. So everybody, including me, will have a diploma in counselling. Everyone will have extensive experience in sight loss. Some have personal experience of sight loss. Others have the work experience. And also, I think, friends that are also visually impaired. We have a counsellor with nursing background, counsellors with sort of background in sort of cognitive behavioural therapy, which you will hear a lot about, which is very sort of focuses on changing your negative thought patterns, which in turn could change your behaviour. I'm trying to think of everybody now. We have counsellors that have worked for other sight loss charities, so have varied experience, but mainly around nursing. I'm trying to think now where. I think it's mainly nursing. My background has been working with families, young people. I've worked in a school with children who have disabilities. I'm also a clinical supervisor. So all of the counsellors have to have clinical supervision. So some are trained also as a supervisor, and I am too. So you wouldn't be speaking to anybody that doesn't have real sort of experience and knowledge of what you're going through, and some of them that will be lived experience.
They have sight loss themselves.
Yes, and I think there's a couple of counsellors that have worked in the field of sort of bereavement as well, and have worked with older adults.
And so because you have these, they have their own specialist areas in some and expertise, don't they? So the assessment part of the process is you decide which is the best counsellor in your team to help that individual, depending on their particular experience.
Yes, you're always sort of bearing in mind, I suppose, when clients are coming through. So if anybody here is referring in, and it's a particular issue, like we had somebody who had a needle phobia, for example, then I might think, oh, perhaps they might be good at working with one of our counsellors, perhaps who's got a nursing background or cognitive behavioural type of approach, where it's very sort of practical. If somebody comes through with Charles Bonnet syndrome, perhaps I might assess them, or the lady that works on the groups. So yeah, it's always bearing in mind kind of what's going to be the best kind of fit, or which counsellor is going to be most helpful. But likewise, if you're matched with a counsellor and you think this isn't quite working, we'd always encourage that person to discuss it with the counsellor, because the same with any of us, if we were to go and look for a therapist, the most important thing is the fit, it's the relationship. And there are times, you know, very occasionally, where we will change to a different counsellor or a different therapist. Most importantly, we want our callers, or the people that come through to us, to get the best experience possible out of the service.
Do you do video consultations as well?
We can do, but actually in the times where we have done sort of WhatsApp sort of video calls, particularly with people abroad, they've asked for the cameras to be off. And so that's a personal choice for whatever reason. Maybe that's linked to visual impairment, or maybe that's just where that person feels comfortable. But the majority of people we do speak to on the telephone. But of course now, if anybody wanted to speak to us via Zoom, etc., we're more than happy to do that.
And there are pros and cons of telephone counselling, I guess. One is that it's very accessible, isn't it? Everybody can use it. I mean, you have a team of how many counsellors? 8, 7?
There's 7 of us altogether, yeah.
So obviously that would be impossible for everybody around the country to reach this service. But the way we do it via the telephone, then anybody in the world can access the Macular Society counselling service. Is there, so that's a clear upside.
Mm-hmm.
Any other actual upsides of telephone? Do people feel, some people perhaps find it easier to confide, possibly because it's a little bit more anonymous, I don't know, than in a face-to-face circumstances?
I suppose it depends absolutely on the individual. There are many people that will say, I find it much easier to talk on the telephone than I would do if it was face-to-face. I think the thing that you've highlighted is the fact that it's an accessible service. So a number of our clients wouldn't be able to travel, or it would be more of an inconvenience to have to get to an appointment. So the fact that we're there and we're on the telephone makes it much easier for the people that we speak to. And there are obviously pros and cons. There will be people that will say, I prefer it face-to-face. But of course, with what we've been going through recently, telephone has been, it's been perfect. I think if sometimes there might be more that you might pick up on if somebody is sat with you in the room. But as you say, maybe for some people it's easier for them to open up. Perhaps it's easier for them to have more honest conversations on the telephone. They'll be different. I think it just depends on the person, but certainly I think the convenience of not having to go anywhere and us kind of coming to the client via the telephone is a massive plus for most people.
And it's available quickly, isn't it? As you say, there's not a waiting time. Somebody makes the point here that we need to be positive about the pandemic, but we do all need to be aware of the exponential growth of infections around the country. Is concerned that there will be worse problems if any restrictions have to be reimposed, and of course, desperately what we don't want, is it? The emotional impact could be really devastating if we all finish at the beginning again.
Yeah, and I think that's something that this evening, obviously, I when I was thinking about speaking to everyone, that I was really sort of bearing in mind that, you know, we could debate whether we agree with the lifting of lockdown or, you know, people not wearing masks in certain situations, but I think it will be a call that would be a lot longer. But I totally agree that even though we know what the lifting of the restrictions are right now, we don't know how long this will last. And there is something, you know, in the back of many people's minds, as you say, that how long will this last for, and what will our future be? And trying to be positive, I think, goes back to trying to sort of be in the here and now and just live your life as safely as you can and do the things that you enjoy right now. Because again, we can't predict what's going to happen. We've all got ideas, but we can't 100% predict.
We can't, and it's very unsettling, isn't it? I guess that in the Macular Society, because one of the big things that we do is face-to-face group sessions, which of course we've had to cancel. Is try to replicate some aspect of that in some ways with telephone conferencing in the main. And since the first lockdown, we got these conference calls going as quickly as we could, and we have done thousands of calls with tens of thousands of participants over the last 14 months, 12 to 14 months and so on. And it is connecting people that's the big stress, isn't it? I mean, it's the curtailment of your life and the things that you want to do, but it's trying to keep people connected and try to reduce the level of isolation, which is inevitable if people are stuck in their own homes all the time. That really
absolutely. Yeah, I think also the Macular Society support groups, I think, have been a lifeline for many people. And there are people that will come through to us at the counselling service and are a bit unsure about joining a group. But I think as long as they know it's something that they can tap into, and if it's for them, great. If it's not, they don't need to continue. But it is about connecting with other people, and that's really important for our well-being, particularly if you're somebody that's isolated and perhaps feeling a bit down. And in those situations, it's really hard, as we know, if any of us feel low, it's really hard to motivate yourself or believe that it's worth making contact with other people, or they'll want to hear what you've got to say. But I would always encourage people to try and just do sort of a little bit. So sometimes a little bit of reaching out can lead to other things or other services and can sort of open up opportunities. But it is about making that initial step. And I think also friends and family, would encourage people, if you do have friends and family, you don't always wait for people to call you. I think try and reach out and make that call, even if it's a 5-minute call, because time and time again I will hear clients say, I don't want to bother whoever it might be. And sometimes it's not that you're bothering, it's just checking in. It doesn't have to be a long call.
Peer support is, we think peer support is really important. So we always say that the experts on living with macular disease are the people who have it, and they know more than any of us who don't have. But one of the things, because macular disease, very often the first time people have ever heard of it is when they've got it. It's very easy to think you're virtually the only person on the planet who's got this weird condition if you've never heard of it before. Yeah. And the point about connecting is that you realize you're not alone. You made this point earlier. You're not alone. Millions of people around the world with macular degeneration. There are About 600,000 plus people with age-related macular degeneration just in the UK, and it's doubling in the next 25 to 30 years. This is an enormous problem, and you are most definitely not alone.